what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, February 13th, 2017, starting a brand new week. And, of course, tomorrow's Valentine's Day. And if you've not made adequate preparations for your significant other, or others, as the case may be tomorrow, then you only have a few hours left to take care of that. Now then, again, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. I want to start off today talking about the situation at the Oroville Dam, because it was amazing when that main spillway began to fall apart. Everybody said, oh, no problem, no problem, no problem. Then they made a big deal about getting the fish out of the way, and it's okay, everybody can relax. And then all of a sudden, at the point where they thought a collapse was only an hour away, they finally ordered the evacuations, and they've evacuated almost 200,000 people, setting up all these centers in neighboring cities and high ground to get these people to. And at the moment, the water level in the reservoir, Lake Oroville, has declined to the point where no more water is going over that emergency spillway. And so everybody's taking a little bit of a sigh of relief, but we're not out of the woods yet, because starting on Wednesday, there's another major rainstorm moving into the area and could drive it up. The big problem here is, of course, the main spillway continues to destroy itself, and the emergency spillway, which nobody thought they were ever going to use until it happened, apparently the force of water was great enough where it was just eroding away the whole hillside, including the supports for the spillway itself. And they discovered a huge gouge, and they're concerned now about the emergency spillway collapsing, which would unleash huge amounts of water running on downstream. And during this break in the weather, they're actually using helicopters to try and fill up this gouge with very large boulders, which hopefully will stabilize it, but nobody's really sure, because some of the videos of the water rushing down the hill show very large boulders being just tumbled along. There's a huge amount of water there. So it is a serious situation. They're supposed to have a press conference here very, very soon. Union Pacific has now halted all train service through the areas below the Oroville Dam. So everybody is having to pull on off. And if this thing were to really cut loose, it's not just Oroville that's at risk. A lot of Southern California draw their drinking water, bathing water, cooking water from the Feather River, which is where the water from the spillways at the Oroville Dam comes on out. And it's already just contaminated. They stirred up the soil and the silt. That's why they had to get the fish out of the fishery. And the water could wind up almost unusable. So this is a very, very, very serious situation. Now, already the finger-pointing and CYA is underway, because apparently 12 years ago, experts were pointing out that emergency spillway, which was made of earth, not concrete, was at risk of a collapse. And so now everybody's saying, oh, no, this was ridiculous, and we're not to blame for anything that's going on. And Governor Jerry Brown has declared a state of emergency, not just for the Oroville Dam, but all the other damage caused by the raging floodwaters. They've had entire highways washed on out, trains derailed, and everything. And now he's asking President Donald Trump for help from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In other words, bring in money. And what a shame that the state of California spent all the California's taxpayers' monies on free stuff for the illegal immigrants instead of making sure the infrastructure was being properly maintained. And I guess now that Governor Brown has his hand out to Washington, D.C., all that talk about California seceding from the United States, I guess, is on hold for the foreseeable future. Let's grab a phone call here. Bob in Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike. I wanted to go back to something you said last week about Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi. I think you paid a compliment to Maxine Waters by saying that she was suffering from dementia. I mean, this woman is not suffering from dementia. She's just plain stupid. She doesn't know the difference between Crimea and Korea. So by saying she's suffering from dementia, you're paying her a very nice compliment.
Well, and then I take it all back.
Okay. Mike, on the petrodollar, I'm a little confused. I mean, there's this talk about Iran, the threat that they've made, I think March 21st, they're not going to sell their oil for dollars. And yet the U.S. is worried about that. Why then would the U.S. pass this law, and Obama signed it, regarding Saudi Arabia and 9/11? Doesn't that directly threaten the petrodollar?
It really does, and the Saudi Arabia situation, Saudi Arabia has been a very loyal supporter of the U.S. government. The Saudi royal family and the Bush family are very, very good friends. But as you know, Israel is still trying to deflect suspicion away from Israel regarding 9/11. And so they're out there blaming it's this person, it's that person. And you remember when 9/11 happened, one of the first people they tried to frame was Saudi Arabia. And it kind of fell apart. Most of the accused hijackers were Saudis, but there's no evidence they were actually on the planes. Some of them turned up alive after 9/11 was over. One of them is actually a pilot for the Saudi National Airlines who sued the United States for defamation and won, not really reported in American corporate media there. But Israel's agenda here is to find a way to sever that relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia, by virtue of the petrodollar deal, is pouring money into the U.S. for investment. And with that kind of volume of money coming in for investment comes a great deal of political influence. Israel's trouble is it's doing nothing but sucking money out of the United States of America and still trying to remain politically in control of the government. And with that kind of a situation, Israel is feeling its control over the United States is directly threatened by Saudi Arabia's investment. And so this appears to be part of a plan to drive a wedge between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and is perfectly consistent with the way Israel has behaved throughout the decades. Every time I hear somebody say that Israel is America's only friend in the Middle East, I think back to the fact that before Israel, we didn't have any enemies in the Middle East. But look at how Israel's constantly trying to divide, drive a wedge between the United States and anybody else in the area. They were cheering on the war in Iraq. Now they're cheering on the war in Iran. The attack on the USS Liberty was intended to trick the United States into seeing Egypt as an enemy and possibly even declare war on them. And there was an armed strike in the air on the way to Cairo when the deception was finally exposed. So that's Israel's agenda. They don't want Saudi Arabia and the United States to be friends. And if in the process Saudi Arabia's ruling family is overthrown and replaced with puppet rulers, nobody would be more pleased about that than Israel.
Okay, but even if that threatens the status, the strength of the dollar, the U.S. would be willing to do that, to do Israel's bidding, even putting the dollar at risk?
If Israel can convince enough people in the U.S. government that Saudi Arabia did 9/11, then yes, it could very well happen, because very few people in Washington, D.C. are thinking outside their immediate agenda and what their supporters want. Hardly anybody is trying to maintain that overview, which is supposed to be Trump's job, by the way. And the issue is, if Saudi Arabia were framed for 9/11, then the United States could simply confiscate all of Saudi Arabia's wealth currently parked in the United States. But again, we know this whole situation about Saudi Arabia being responsible for 9/11 is utter nonsense. Look for what should be there and isn't. And what is not there is a motive for Saudi Arabia to carry out 9/11. They have done very well in their friendship with the United States of America. They've profited handsomely off the petrodollar deal. They're profiting handsomely off of their investments inside the United States. They're not going to want to mess with that. And if by some chance Saudi Arabia wanted to harm the United States of America, they don't need to crash airplanes into skyscrapers to do it. All they have to do is start asking for their money back every time one of these contracts comes due, refuse to roll it over, demand the repatriation of their wealth to Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. economy would crumble. So framing Saudi Arabia for 9/11 would give the U.S. government the excuse to freeze all of Saudi assets inside the United States and basically steal them, for lack of a better word.
Oh, finally, Mike. Oh, it was good to see Claire in the executive chair on Friday. She once again spoke about Yemen. But what is this Yemen? I mean, you talk about wars of resources. Yemen is resource poor. It's the poorest country in the Middle East. What's the war all about? Is it just a flex of muscle by the Sunnis?
No, what the war is about, it's part of a continuing pattern of overthrowing the legitimate government of every nation in the Middle East and replacing them with an obedient U.S. puppet ruler. And that happened in Yemen some years ago, and the people of Yemen said, we don't really like this idea, so they have kicked their puppet rulers out and are trying to reclaim their country. And that's why every time you hear about the government of Yemen, you will hear a phrase in front of it, the internationally approved government of Yemen, which is the puppet rulers. And there actually is no foundation in international law that allows other countries to decide what government will be in a particular nation or not. It's just a complete made-up fairy tale, puffy piece of propaganda that they're putting on out there. But what's happening in Yemen is the same thing that's happening in Libya. It is a population trying to kick out an imposed puppet junta and regain control of their own nation. And the United States at this point dares not let any of their conquered provinces break free because that will give all the other conquered provinces bad ideas.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for clearing that up.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, we're beginning to see a big pushback against these anti-Trump protesters. As we've been seeing with the video coming out of Portland, Oregon, every time the police take them down, everybody's cheering. Everybody's sick and tired of all these whiners and crybabies. And they may have stepped over a line because up in Washington State, there was a horrendous traffic jam caused by a bunch of these anti-Trump protesters. And where it really got ugly was where this Interstate 5 was going around a tight curve. People coming up on the curve couldn't see that traffic had stopped on the far side of the curve, resulted in a big truck rollover, victim hospitalized, injured, and it's like I said before, for a color revolution to work, they have to have the public's sympathy and support of the general population, and they're not getting it. Everything they do just makes them look worse and worse in the eyes of the general population. This attempt at a color revolution in the United States is going to fail exactly the same way as Iran 2009 fell apart. Now, this point, and I don't know why this is still around. Okay. Before I get into this, I'm just looking at the Fox News feed, and basically the senior advisor to President Trump is out there saying there are, in fact, massive numbers of non-citizens registered to vote in the U.S. I wanted to get that on out there because the corporate media is still out there trying to say, oh, there's no election fraud. The election was honest. Hillary won the popular vote. She should be empress, blah, 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 blah. Now, the other thing the corporate media is still trying to make a big deal about is that Donald Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, met with Russia's ambassador to the United States before Trump was actually sworn in as president. And they're out there trying to claim that, first of all, they discussed the lifting of sanctions and that it would be technically illegal under the Logan Act at that point. But it really hinges on they could talk about the sanctions as long as no deal was made. If a deal was made, then it's a violation of the Logan Act. But First Amendment, they're allowed to talk about anything they want. Now, both Flynn and Russia's ambassador to the United States are saying there was no talk about the sanctions whatsoever, but this is being pushed on out there to try and attack Michael Flynn and force him to come on down. And what's really interesting is these stories about Flynn and the ambassador violating the Logan Act emerged from the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes, which means at this point there's probably nothing to back it up. But the Trump administration and the government of Russia are saying it did not happen at all. Now, apparently over at the National Security Council, staffers are trying to retroactively purge their social media of any posts critical of the president. They're concerned about reprisals. I think it puts a poor face on the government when the people who are in those offices are dissing the president, but at the same time, if it's social media on their own time, the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech does apply. But it is tacky to be doing that here. Now, the other week we were talking about rumors of a coming major shakeup within the White House itself, and possibly including that chief of staff, because apparently Donald Trump is very unhappy at how many neocons and how many war hawks are somehow managing to infiltrate, worm their way into the White House staff. And we're seeing yet another confirmation today from governmentslaves.info that Reince Priebus may be on his way out as chief of staff. And that is a very, very powerful position. I think Trump picked him for that position in order to cement relations or repair relations with the GOP for the 2020 election. But Priebus is apparently making the same mistake that Chris Christie did, which is to welcome in the old guard as much as possible in order to hijack and control the Trump administration, and apparently Trump has now picked up on that. A new poll has come on out confirming that the American people find Donald Trump much more trustworthy than the corporate media. And more people are bypassing the corporate media spin. They're going directly to Trump's Twitter feeds. They're going directly to Trump's YouTube channel. They want to get the word from the president's mouth because they know once it gets into the corporate media, anything could happen at all. And that is being illustrated by a Wall Street Journal opinion piece on Maurice Greenberg, the former chairman and CEO of AIG. And they're out there saying that last Friday's settlement with New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman represented a vindication that Maurice Greenberg hadn't really done anything, which is not at all what it means. And the Wall Street Journal apparently has a bad case of brain fog. They're trying to rehabilitate the reputation of Greenberg. And if you read the actual statements coming out of the New York State Attorney, his office, it's very obvious. It's not a vindication or an exoneration of anybody. They're saying these crimes were committed. This is the agreed upon settlement going on. All right, let's turn our attention to the war zones. Boy, Fox is spending a lot of time on vote fraud, and the deniers are out there. Oh, there's no such thing as election fraud. But we need an open, transparent election system, and that's going to be one of my major focuses going into the future. Now, over in Syria, Al-Qaeda is trying to attack Daraa. Syrian government forces have prevailed on ISIS near Al-Bab, so it's still going on back and forth, but at this point, it's only a matter of time. Very clearly, the U.S.-backed terrorists are on the run here. Now, as you know, last week we had an updated version of Assad is gassing his own people, Saddam has nuclear weapons, Gaddafi is tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting, and he's abusing his camels, or whatever else they're going to say, where Amnesty International came out with this report claiming to confirm or corroborate claims that there was a secret prison in Syria where 13,000 people had been tortured and executed. And it is a load of nonsense. It's clearly written to be provocative and cause trouble and provoke a war. And you need to remember, Amnesty International also corroborated that story about how Iraqi soldiers were stealing incubators from Kuwait and leaving the babies to die on the cold floor. And we know that one was a complete fabrication. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about Amnesty International coming out with this report that was reported in the American corporate media, and even the corporate media weren't happy with it. In Amnesty International, they put 13,000 was the upper limit of people they thought had been tortured and executed. The lower limit was 5,000, and the corporate media said at least 13,000, so they're even trying to inflate the numbers there. And as I said before, Amnesty International also came out with a report where they claim to corroborate that story, that Iraq soldiers were stealing incubators from Kuwait and leaving the babies to die on the cold floor, and that was an absolute, complete fraud. It was a piece of propaganda crafted by Hill and Knowlton, public relations. The young lady who claimed to be a nurse was actually the daughter of the Kuwait ambassador. The whole thing was a fake, and Amnesty International put their imprimatur on it. Now, Russia is saying that Amnesty International did this, making claims of fake atrocities, trying to derail the Syrian peace talks. Because the United States does not want the peace talks to move forward because it's not going to result in the Syria they want, which is Assad is out and their puppet ruler is in. And also, if they could get traction on this nonsensical report, it would justify sending boots on the ground into Syria, which is something else the United States would like to do. Now, as I mentioned before, there are indications that this conflict in Syria is all but over, and a really strong indicator of that is the Syrian government has announced they're ready to talk about prisoner swaps with the rebels, which is something you generally start doing when you're near the end of a conflict. So, now then, I am really sorry to see this happening, but apparently on Russia has released some drone footage showing the current state of some ancient preserved, well, they're not preserved anymore, ancient sites in Palmyra, in particular a Roman theater called a proscenium and a tetrapylon. Now, these date back to 270 A.D., and they have just been destroyed. And you kind of wonder why ISIS would waste the explosives to do that. But then you need to remember, from Israel's point of view, there's a reason they want antiquities in other countries destroyed. Because in Israel, there's virtually nothing to back up their ancient story of origin. There's nothing about, nothing archaeological that supports the kingdoms of David and Solomon, or even the first temple. The few artifacts that have been put out there have been revealed to be fakes, such as the temple staff pomegranate and the Jehoash tablet. You go into any other country on that part of earth, you can't take 3 steps without tripping over hard archaeological evidence of their ancient history. I mean, take a look at Egypt, and estimates are they've only basically recovered 1/3 of what's there to be found. A lot of people are starting to use Google Earth to just scan over vast areas of Egyptian desert, and they're starting to spot things that look like the remains of forgotten cities, temples, and so forth. Israel doesn't have that, and Israel very much would like to level the playing field, as it were, so that people can't say, look, all these other countries have got all this archaeological evidence of their ancient history. Israel, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. Interestingly enough, Jean-Claude Juncker, who's the president of the European Commission, has just sent over 600 million euros to the Kiev regime. He's taking the European taxpayers' money and he's sending it to Poroshenko in order to fund further military provocation toward the east. And the Europeans are upset. I would be too. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, on Libya, Mike, people, I just want, if you got new listeners, people need to check out Gaddafi's water project.
Yes.
That was amazing. You know, I mean, the guy lived in a tent. He had free health care for his people, free university for his people, and yeah, he got set up by the British. I think the NATO basically set him up to kill him, to get him out of there, so they can use that place as a launching pad into Syria. It's a beachhead. It was a beachhead.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Well, you know, Gaddafi was doing all these wonderful things for Libya, but what really put him on the top of the special high-interest targets list was shutting down the privately owned central bank and replacing it with a state bank to run the Libyan public currency as a public utility. Then he invented a new value-based currency, the gold dinar, and made it available for trade across Africa. And everybody said, oh, yeah, we'd rather use a currency for trade that isn't accruing interest to some banker somewhere. And if you've ever read All Wars Are Banker Wars, you know that the private central bankers are absolutely dead set against any people or any nation simply making its own money for internal use. And they will assassinate leaders, have assassinated leaders, started wars to maintain the human population in its servitude and enslavement to private central banking. And it's been going on for 300 years now.
That's another thing, though, you just said. It was the richest country in Africa. It's not in the Middle East. A lot of people just don't know that, you know?
Yes.
But, Mike, on Syria, it's the same thing. Assad's free university.
Yes.
Free health care. Yet, and remember that picture of John Kerry having dinner with him and his wife? John Kerry and his wife, and Assad and his wife. But yet, this is how they backstab. These people are backstabbers, you know? They don't care about nobody.
Well, you see, here's the thing. Right now, the world is trending toward serious fascism, and ultimately the New World Order is intended to be a fascistic system. And just like private central bankers can't stand the idea of a country living without a private central bank because it gives the slaves uppity ideas, the same thing holds true for how a society's economy is organized. And any country where the government is using the revenues to take care of their own people is considered a threat to this model of the people exist to make the government rich, and then the government plays the great global game with the money. And that's why they hated Hugo Chavez so much, because he had all this oil revenue coming into Venezuela, and he was spending it on the Venezuelan people. And they tried to get Chavez out with a coup d'etat. That lasted about 1 week. And ever since Chavez has been replaced, they've been waging economic war against Venezuela. They can't stand the idea of a free people or a free currency. This whole private central banking system is all about enslaving the people with a psychological sense of debt obligation. And again, you go back and you look at slavery in the antebellum South. Yeah, there were slaves who tried to escape, but for the most part, the slaves were just content right where they were because they had been brainwashed to think this was the way life was supposed to be. The same thing in ancient Rome or in medieval Europe, where the people are being ruled over by people claiming that the gods said, I am your ruler. And the general population went along with it because they'd been brainwashed into thinking this is the way life is supposed to be. And the same thing is taking place now. In public school, we're all being brainwashed to think life under private central banking is the way life is supposed to be. And it isn't. This nation started with a completely different system, one that was a threat to those European banking families. They were trying to tear it down with using their agent in place, Alexander Hamilton. When Lincoln came out with his greenbacks to fund the Civil War, Europe actually considered invading the United States on behalf of the Confederacy. And it was all over that piece of ink and paper.
That's why I think they killed Lincoln for, and also JFK. Well, JFK was a couple of reasons, but I think that money and power is more important than anything else.
That's always it. Now, back in Lincoln's day, people were assassinated for much simpler reasons, but in a more sophisticated society, I think in the modern age, never think there is a single cause for a war or a single cause for an assassination. What it is when you get a group of diverse interests who see their particular interests best served by the same act going forward. That is your conspiracy to start a war or to assassinate somebody.
And remember, Rothschild, I care not who currency. I care not who makes the law as long as I control the currency.
Give me control of a nation's currency, and I care not who makes the laws. That was Rothschild's quote.
And that's to this day exact. And Mike, you're right on the fascists, Marxists, because they can't take any disagreement against them. We were looking at fascism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it, in real time right now. People don't want to believe it or not.
Okay, Dustin. Okay. Fascism and Marxism are two opposite ends of the economic spectrum. And let me go over these definitions one more time here. Capitalism is a system in which if you make money, you get to keep it. If you lose money, you are responsible for that debt. Because freedom means not only the freedom to succeed, but the freedom to fail and the responsibility to accept either outcome. Now, under socialism, communism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it, if you make money, it is taxed away to serve society. If you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can pick up and start again. Now, under fascism, if you make money, you get to keep it. And only if you lose money is society taxed to cover the losses. And we have been seeing that manifesting in the United States going way back. It was certainly very obvious following the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008, where the government's answer to all of this was take trillions of dollars away from the American people and give it to the bankers so the bankers could loan it back to the American people at interest. And it was a great deal for the bankers and lousy for the American people, and it didn't really fix anything, because those financial manipulators just kept on playing the same games. Now we're looking at bubbles in subprime car loans, student loans. As long as they're allowed to get rich quick off of these schemes and then dump the losses on the general population, they're going to keep on doing it. There's no reason for them to stop.
And Mike, one more question. I'll take your answer off the air. Can you just go over again what was the thing in the 70s with John McCain? And the savings and loan, I believe?
That was the Keating scandal. That was the Keating scandal, and the Keating Five, of which John McCain was one, and so was, unfortunately, John Glenn. And this was one of the best-known examples of this whole savings and loan meltdown that was caused by deregulation of the industry. And some of it was intentionally done because if you go back to Arkansas in the 1980s, they were using the S&L rescue program as a money grower for the CIA's gun and drug running operation down to Nicaragua. And the way it would work is the people who were selling all this tons of cocaine that were being brought into the United States of America would take that cash, blend it with cash from legitimately owned cash-based businesses, convenience stores, movie theaters, things like that, and they would go to the S&Ls and they would deposit the money in numbered, brokered accounts that were below the insurance limit. And one of the things George Herbert Walker Bush had done was raise that maximum insurance on savings accounts from $10,000 to $100,000. That's what made this thing much easier to do. Then some of the other operators in the scam would buy a piece of worthless land and flip it back and forth to make it look like it was more valuable than it was, or they would use a compromised bank examiner to say this land is worth X number of dollars as collateral. And then they would borrow back from the S&L the money that had been deposited in there from the drug sales, and it could be sent anywhere in the world free and clear for the laundry. Well, then the S&L gets into trouble. The company the shell company that borrowed the money out disappears. The loan defaults. The S&L goes to the piece of land as collateral, realizes it's utterly worthless, and the S&L collapses. And here's where it gets really good, because the Resolution Trust Corporation came into all these S&Ls that were failing with a checkbook full of U.S. taxpayer dollars and refunded the money to the original depositors, who were the people who'd played this scam. And so less legal fees and various other costs. This could not only launder all of your drug money, but would make it grow by 1 2/3. and all inside the United States at zero risk to the criminals, and all on the backs of the U.S. taxpayer. And that's how that happened.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now then, getting on back to the war zones, North Korea has revealed pictures of a new missile they're putting into development. Up until now, North Korea's missiles have all been liquid-fueled, which means it takes a long while to set them up, get them ready to fly, and that, of course, represents a window of vulnerability during which the missiles can be spotted by satellites or surveillance aircraft. This new one is solid fuel, which means they can basically pop it out of the can and get it into flight much more quickly. And, of course, the United States and Japan are demanding the United Nations take action over this newest, possibly nuclear-capable missile. And here's the part that is really annoying. The attitude that we're seeing from within the United States towards North Korea, and for that matter, Iran, is, how dare they prepare to fight back against us? Are they allowed to do that? I thought the rules said that they couldn't prepare to defend their country from us. Because look at who's doing all the invading and conquering. It's not North Korea, and it's not Iran. We know who the aggressor is in this run-up to the next world war. And it is, unfortunately, the United States of America. Now, interesting little article came out of Desert Peace, saying that it's time for Israel to wake up to the fact that Donald Trump is not their president. Because Donald Trump was not chosen for Israel. He was chosen for the United States. And that certainly is true. Now, obviously, Israel's support of Hillary Clinton was predicated on their expectation that Hillary would basically do whatever Israel wanted without question. Trump is already starting to dig in his heels. Remember what I said? When he starts having to deal with them directly as a government, a lot of his media-induced illusions about Israel and Palestine are going to start falling away. And now we are hearing that the U.S. Embassy is going to remain in Tel Aviv. It is not going to move to Jerusalem. Remember, they were bandying that one around. Oh, he's going to move it to Jerusalem. It proves Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And all of a sudden, Trump is saying, no, they're not moving the U.S. Embassy. That's staying in Tel Aviv. All righty. Now then, the Pentagon puts out these very nicely formatted reports about airstrikes, which go to Congress for funding considerations and go to the media. And they present a very clear picture of the strikes. Unfortunately, it turns out that the data is not accurate. And apparently thousands of airstrikes have been left off of this report. And the concern is that these are airstrikes that might consist of war crimes, airstrikes that took out innocents. We know how many hospitals they've taken on out. And there's a lot of hiding going on there over at the Pentagon here. Now, another issue they're dealing with, and remember, the Pentagon has lost all of these huge amounts of money without trace. And they're all trying to say, oh, it's just an accounting problem. The money's there somewhere, we're just not really sure. Well, there's a lot of cheating going on. And according to this story over in Anti-War, there's a problem with what are called ghost soldiers in Afghanistan, and they're costing U.S. taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And basically what it is these Afghan military commanders who are working on behalf of the United States just make up a whole bunch of names and say, these people are serving in my unit, and they just keep the salaries. And there's no oversight. Nobody is doing any checking to see if there are real soldiers out there being paid this money, or if it's just going into the pockets of the commanders. Now, we have been talking about the deplorable state of military hardware. The latest U.S. aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford, they're now grudgingly admitting it may never actually be usable in real combat. Legion of problems with the F-35, F-22, Freedom and Independence class littoral combat ships, the stealth destroyer, the Zumwalt, all of these problems going on. And they're not confined just to the United States. because apparently over in Great Britain, they found a serious crack in the reactor of one of their Trafalgar submarines, the HMS Trenchant. And they're looking at this and saying that this fracture appears to be an irreparable generic fault. In other words, all the other submarines have this problem. And so as of right now, half of the Royal Navy's fast attack submarines have to be kept at the dock. They don't know if the reactors can be repaired or replaced, or if it's just going to be time to scrap these and buy something else here. But for all the money that goes into military procurement, is it not amazing the junk that they're getting for all of that cash here? All right, now let's talk about the entertainment industry a little bit. It's been on display on the BAFTA Awards, the British equivalent of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The presenters were not pulling any punches. They're bashing Donald Trump, and they're not questioning his policies. It's personal attacks. It's very, very, very shameful. And I'm looking at this article that came out of Armstrong Economics about how the entertainment industry almost seems to be selling the idea that there ought to be a civil war in the United States of America. And they're out there promoting, pushing these riots, the anti-Trump protesters. They're trying to glorify them, romanticize them, lionize them. And I think maybe somebody needs to step back and think very carefully. Do you want a civil war in the streets of the United States of America? Because it could be your street. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Pardon me. Welcome back to the show here. Now, at the Grammy Awards, Joy Villa made a bit of a stir because after she did what she did in the Grammys and she was outside in that little press area, she took off her outer coat and she was wearing this red, white, and blue dress that was emblazoned, "Make America Great." And it's amazing how Black Lives Matter support you only when you agree with them, because they've gone on the attack. It was a firestorm of criticism all over Twitter, the net result of which is Joy Villa is now one of the top sales over at iTunes. They have inadvertently made this lady very, very rich. And Black Lives Matter, again, getting on back to that idea that you cannot have a successful color revolution if you alienate the general population. Because we're hearing that one of the leaders, in fact, the founder of Black Lives Matter, Yusra Kogali, has publicly said white people are an inferior, subhuman race and suffer from genetic defects. Now, have you heard of this on the corporate media? Probably not. But can you imagine some person who's founder or affiliated with a whites group getting on out and saying black people are inferior? What would be the media's response then? Ooh, boy, it would just be, open season. And not only is this discrediting Black Lives Matter to be saying such things, it is further discredits the corporate media for the obvious bias that they're showing in this case. It's okay for the, for people to say discriminate against whites is okay, and but you can't say anything bad about them. Remember the big stink when somebody said we should say all lives matter, and they said, "Oh no, you're being a racist there to say all lives matter." Really is rather ridiculous here. Now then, Sarah Silverman is out there, and when your whole consciousness is about finding things to scream and whine about, you will very often make mistakes. I remember, I think it was a year and a half ago, somebody screamed about a billboard advertising a tea kettle for sale, because if you squinted your eyes, the tea kettle sort of kind of look like Adolf Hitler. And remember the big stink over the lawn dwarves who were waving a hand, and they said, oh, no, that's the Nazi salute. Well, Sarah Silverman uncorked by saying that she was seeing swastikas spray-painted all over the streets near her home. And she went totally ballistic on this whole nonsense. As it turns out, anybody who saw the marks would first of all realize they're not swastikas in the first place. Second of all, they're surveyor's marks. They're utility markings for maintenance of whatever's underneath the cement there. It's ridiculous. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, getting on back to those Royal Navy submarines. It turns out that one of the best-known U.S. military aircraft are having their own problems. And apparently nearly two-thirds of the U.S. Navy's FA-18 strike fighter jets are currently unable to fly, grounded due to repair delays or because they were awaiting spare parts. And we've all seen the FA-18 on the movie Independence Day. It's like that was the only aircraft the United States owned because they kept using that same model over and over again. I remember a while back seeing a documentary on the Blue Angels where, I mean, they are amazing. There's no question about it. And the documentary spent a great deal of time talking about how difficult it was to keep those aircraft flying because parts for some of these aircraft are very hard to find. It's an older model. And given its history and its ability, I think it would be a lot less expensive to simply rebuild the supply chain for parts than to just throw them all away and come up with a whole new aircraft, especially given our most recent efforts like the F-35. Somebody had put out a story a little while ago about how Trump and Bannon were considering firing Michael Flynn over this supposed Russiagate thing, and it turns out that story is just more fake news because Kellyanne Conway has just come on out and said that Donald Trump has full confidence in National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, so that issue is hopefully going to go away very, very quickly. Let's take a phone call now. Tom in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day, Michael. A long time not hear from you, but yeah, Michael, I just want to talk about Donald Trump's not even been president 1 month. He's done more than I can remember 6 presidents doing. Jeff Sessions not even been Attorney General a week, and you can already see what's going to happen, how this country is going to get straightened out. And fantastic to see him standing there with the portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office with Trump and Sessions and Jackson. I thought that was mesmerizing. But getting back to you're talking about Sarah Silver Schmuck or whatever she is, a schmuck, and all these other schmucks that won Holly Weird. It's unbelievable to me that they are only 2-3%, Michael, and they have all this power in Holly Weird. I mean, I know about Metro Goldwyn Mayer and all that, but how these Zionists are just completely left. And it's all run by Soros.
Well,
Michael,
no, it's not. It's not all run by Soros. First of all, you need to understand that any time Israel is getting ready to attack somebody, and they're attacking Gaza again already, they will have their assets around the world remind everybody of the Holocaust and World War II, and Nazis are still real, and we must all support Israel against the Nazis. And that's why Sarah Silverman was out there. I mean, she's literally walking down the street saying, I got to find something that looks like a swastika. Oh, they're on the ground! And she went for it and embarrassed herself. But the other issue is you need to remember the early history of motion pictures, where after Edison invented the motion picture camera, and he had his own little studio, it was this shack that was on a giant turntable, so it could always face the sun. It was called the Black Maria. And there were people who realized this was going to be a hugely profitable industry, and they started basically just copying off Edison's camera systems without paying royalties on it. And Edison tried to set up a patents company to say, if you're going to be in the movie business, you owe me, royalties, rentals on the movie cameras themselves. And most of these early producers in New York, New Jersey, had grown rich in the fur trade, And what they did was they decided that they didn't want to have to pay for the use of the movie cameras, so they decided to relocate out to the other side of the country. And C.B. DeMille was given the job of finding a new home for motion pictures. He almost settled in Arizona, and then he rode the train out to the West Coast to what was then this little orchard area selling fruits and vegetables called Hollywood. And that's why filmmaking moved to Hollywood, to get away from Edison's lawyers, along with the plus that they were not all that far from the border with Mexico if those lawyers ever showed up. That's how Hollywood got built.
Michael?
Yeah.
Michael,
Yeah.
Listen, first off, Thomas Edison has a museum in Fort Myers, Florida. I've been there many times.
Yes.
He was very tight friends with Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone.
Yes.
I'm going to let you guys know that. Number one, the Jewish people back in the days of Hollywood getting started had Nickelodeon machines where they put a penny in there and they turned the wheel.
Yes.
That's how they made a lot of their money in the beginning. They used Nickelodeon machine and in, so you pull your hand and run the film.
Well,
So
that's because the projectors
really
hadn't been
making all the money.
invented yet. The projectors didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but then what happened here, Michael, is what happened with Hollywood, in my belief, is that Edison, he didn't protect it like he didn't protect AC current with Tesla, but that's beside the point. The point of the matter is, we're talking currently right now. They're so powerful out there in Hollywood, and they're not going to let you don't even see hardly any Christian actors anymore, movie stars or anything. Okay, it's unbelievable.
No, there's no question. There's no question about that. Listen, I need to get back to one thing, and then I'm going to let you go here. The reason Edison didn't protect AC power is he didn't think it was going to be the best system. Edison promoted DC power, and there was this big battle between Edison and Westinghouse to define the electrical standard for the United States. And when it became obvious that AC power transmitted over long lines with less loss, it eventually settled on Westinghouse's AC system, and Tesla had gone to work for Westinghouse after his falling out with Thomas Edison. And Edison literally went around the country electrocuting animals with AC current to prove that the Westinghouse system was deadly. The reverse is actually true. DC current will kill. In fact, Edison invented the electric chair for executions as a way of proving AC current was more dangerous. Unfortunately, the first guy they put in that chair to be executed by AC took like 20 minutes to die. And that disaster kind of tipped public opinion away from Edison and over to Westinghouse's AC system.
Michael, can I say one more thing? Michael,
real quick.
Can I say one more thing? Yeah, so I'd like to know if Bill Clinton's going to go on the Maury Povich show with his son Danny Williams and they're going to do a DNA test. I want to see that on major networks. I want to see the Bill Clinton, Danny Williams DNA test. Can you imagine that, what it would do to the left? Could you imagine that, the shockwave will send through the whole country if they actually can give Clinton $1 million and Danny Williams $1 million to do the DNA test and found out that Clinton has an illegitimate black son? Could you imagine, Michael?
Well, it would be fun. It would be fun. I'd much rather, have somebody come forward and have that final piece of evidence to prove that Vincent Foster was in fact murdered. Because the Clintons destroyed Claire and my life over that whole issue 23 going on 24 years ago now.
Yes. That's mine.
Okay.
Well, your show will reach out to people to do something about it.
That would be nice. All right, Tom, we're going to let you go.
Have a great day, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. All right, now then, we're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting into the economic news, Trump has announced that SoftBank Group core founder and CEO Masayoshi Son is meeting with Donald Trump, and the Japanese telecommunications company is going to invest $50 billion in the United States, which includes plans to create 50,000 new high-paying jobs, jobs that require skills, jobs that require education, which they're not getting under Common Core, but there's always trade school here. Now, over in Switzerland, Switzerland has attracted a lot of corporate investment by having very low taxes for multinational corporations. And the result of the low taxation is corporations go into Switzerland, they set up companies, they employ people. It actually works very well. The amount of taxation versus the economic health of a nation follows this curve where the more economic activity you have, the more tax revenues collect on the existing tax rates. But government gets greedy, they start raising the tax rates, and it starts driving business away. And they can actually do a lot more harm than good. Remember Reagan's big tax cut? And everybody said, oh, it's going to bankrupt the government. The Democrats were just crying intensely over that. And when Reagan signed that huge tax cut, the U.S. economy started operating much higher level. And it actually resulted in more tax revenues going to the government under the tax cut than would have been the case with the elevated tax rates. But for government, taxes are less about the actual money, because the Federal Reserve just makes it up for them, and more about exerting control over your life. If you look at all the things that are taxed and controlled, taxation is not just raising revenue, it's controlling the activity of society, not always to the benefit of society itself. So over in Switzerland, the government was under pressure from the EU to end this favorable tax treatment because it was seen as unfair to the rest of the EU. And under Swiss law, it had to be put to a popular vote, and the Swiss voters decided they wanted to keep the low taxes for the multinational corporations because they like having those corporations in Switzerland providing high-paying jobs for the Swiss people. Now, over at Spotify, they're dealing with a little bit of difficulty. In March of last year, Spotify raised $1 billion from investors at an interest rate of 5% a year, plus a discount of 20% on shares once the IPO takes place. However, if you look carefully at this agreement, the interest rate goes up by 1 percentage point and the discount by 2.5 percentage points every 6 months until the IPO happens. So as time goes on, and Spotify can't launch the IPO, Spotify must pay ever larger sums to its creditors just to settle the interest on the loan, while the amount of money it can raise from its IPO is trimmed by an even greater amount, 2.5 times. And if Spotify cannot get ahead of this arithmetic, they may be in serious, serious trouble. Doesn't anybody spreadsheet this stuff out before they agree to this deal? The Rothschilds are back in the news again, and apparently the Rothschild Bank is now under criminal investigation over a missing $4 billion in this global corruption probe. Now, Baron David de Rothschild and his company, the Rothschild Financial Services Group, were indicted by French prosecutors for allegedly defrauding British pensioners in a scheme that saw huge sums of money embezzled. And I think this is a good illustration of what I mean by a money junkie, because the Rothschilds, they're not in need. They're not going to miss any meals. And yet, it's still not enough. They have to come up with more. The same thing with Bernie Madoff with the loot. The man was incredibly wealthy, co-founder of NASDAQ, but he wasn't enough. His addiction needed to be fed, and that's why he set up that little Ponzi scheme, defrauded his investors. Now, I'm sure we'd all like to be rich, at least to be comfortable. I would, no question about it. But here we're seeing people who have got immense wealth, and they're addicted to it. They have to have more. They need that new rush of more money coming on in from other people's pockets. They're gamblers. If you've been to Las Vegas or any place else where gambling is allowed, you have seen gambling addicts. And as a matter of fact, when I worked in Las Vegas as an entertainer, I remember seeing all over these little back streets these gambling treatment centers, clinics for the people who actually lived in Las Vegas who'd gotten addicted and were trying to basically get out of it. And so we see the Bernie Madoffs or the Rothschilds who've already got so much wealth, more wealth than they could ever possibly spend in a lifetime, and it's still not enough. They must have more by hook or by crook. So anyway, back to the Rothschilds. 2 months ago, the Swiss branch of the Edmond de Rothschild Group became the target of a French criminal probe regarding a business relationship managed by a former employee. And apparently there's a question regarding hundreds of millions of dollars sent to an account at a bank at Luxembourg that originated from Malaysia Development Berhad. So the money is shifting around all over the globe, and investigators are now taking a look. Now, we all know there is a financial upset coming. We all know the corporate media and the liberals are going to try and blame Donald Trump for it, the way Herbert Hoover was blamed for the Depression of the 1930s. And it's led to a rather interesting observation from Investment Watch blog saying if there's going to be a recession, the sooner it hits, the better, because then it more credibly belongs to the Obama economic policies, and Donald Trump could be seen as the savior trying to pull us out of recession in time for the 2020 elections. And from a political planner's point of view, there is merit in that argument. Once you accept there's going to be an economic upset, and there's no way to avoid it, you start thinking, how is it best going to play if it happens now or 2 years from now? 2 years from now, everybody will say it's all Trump's fault. And they're already trying to say that. But even before the inauguration, we were getting all over the corporate media that Obama is leaving the economy in a wonderful condition. We've had a full recovery, and we know it's all a lie. We know that the interest rate growth is fudged. We know the unemployment numbers are fudged. We know the plunge protection team is still out there propping up the stock market to keep people from emptying their portfolios and going into silver and gold. But that's what the corporate media is going to sell you, that when it all implodes because of policies that have been in effect for the last 30 years, it's all going to be blamed on Donald Trump. So, now then, up in Oregon, they were proposing a bizarre tax on older vehicles. And this bill proposed would have required owners of vehicles 20 years old or more to pay a $1,000 tax every 5 years. And the revenue generated would have gone to the state highway fund, or at least that's what they're saying. Supposedly gas and tire taxes and motor vehicle violation fines are supposed to go to that highway fund. Now, the bill has died because, with the exception of people who are rich enough to own and maintain classic cars, the burden of this tax bill falls on the poor. People who can't afford to buy a new car. I'm one of them. I'm driving a 17-year-old Honda. In 3 years, I would be liable for this $1,000 bill from the Oregon tax authorities. If I had $1,000, I'd be getting a newer car. And so, basically, this is a bill that punishes people who can't afford a new car, while the people who just bought a brand new Lexus get to just drive right on by. And I'm glad that they killed it. It was a dumb, dumb idea. Okay, retailer Gander Mountain may be headed for bankruptcy. They're closing 160 of their stores. Noodles and Company are going to close 55 of their stores. They've just announced their 6th consecutive quarter of decline. People don't have the money to go to restaurants anymore. People are cooking at home now, both for economic reasons and because they want to try and find organic, natural food to eat and stay away from all the chemicals here. MyFit Foods has abruptly announced the closing of all their stores nationwide. It's all locking up because all the money is concentrated at the very top. Now, if you are on an Obamacare-compliant health insurance policy, and most of us are, your premiums are probably going to go up as much as 40% next year. 40%. I don't even want to tell you what I'm paying for my Obamacare-compliant health insurance. And I really can't afford to pay any more than I already am. Now then, do you remember the Obama phone? The Lifeline program where everybody gets a phone at taxpayer expense, riddled with fraud. Apparently the new head of the FCC has that program in their sights. The free phones are going to go away. And I think that's a really good idea. It was just an outright pander, and a lot of those phones got used for criminal activity. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. The Royal Bank of Scotland has announced they're going to be cutting 15,000 jobs. And I know it's a wonderful thing when Trump can come in and announce some foreign corporations coming on in. They're going to invest billions of dollars, and they're going to create so many thousands of jobs. Unfortunately, as fast as Trump is trying to create new jobs, existing jobs are just going away. The whole system is locking up for a very, very simple reason. For an economy to function smoothly, the currency must be flowing freely at all levels of the economy and into all necessary sectors of investment. When the system is gamed to suck all the wealth of the nation up and put it in the pockets of the 0.1% at the very, very top, there's nothing left for the economy to operate on. Oh, sure, they'll be willing to loan you more money at interest, but that's not a solution. That accelerates the problem. Now, Tokyo, as you know, is going to host the 2020 Olympic Games, and they've come up with a rather clever idea. They are asking the Japanese public to donate their old cell phones and small appliances, tablets, whatever, and they're going to basically recycle the gold out of them. A lot of people don't realize how much gold is used in the manufacture of these electronic devices. It's one of the reasons we have these areas of the world where they buy up computer scrap and they render it down to recover the metals. And it's a very, very toxic environment. The working conditions are terrible, but there is enough money in there to make it profitable for those who are doing that. So Tokyo is going to take all these phones and appliances, and they're going to render them down for the gold necessary for their gold medals. And they're hoping that they're also going to be able to recover bronze and silver, which are not used as much in electronics. But they're doing it to emphasize the idea of sustainability and reducing the costs. Now, this gets us back to a topic I like to touch on from time to time. It's called planned obsolescence. And it's rather amazing to see all these people who claim to love the environment as long as we're talking about a carbon tax. And they won't even address the issue of how planned obsolescence, the making of products designed to fail after just a few years, is raping the environment. Because the model is you go on out and you dig up raw materials, you process them into this year's fashion statement must-have gizmo. It's used for a few years and then thrown away to make way for the next update, the next whiz-bang. And it is very, very wasteful of our natural resources, and none of the environmental activists seem to want to address this particular issue. It's always human-caused global warming, and because that's the agenda, get you to submit to another tax. They're not really concerned with the environment. Okay, now then, we're getting word now, apparently the Secretary of State of Kansas has come out saying in excess of 1 million people in that state may have fraudulently voted. This whole election fraud issue is really starting to heat on up. And actually he's saying 1 million people in the whole country. Well, that's even less than the numbers we're getting out of votefraud.org and truethevote.org. But more and more people are willing to stand up and say, there is a problem here with the way we run elections in this country. It's too opaque. There are too many opportunities for fraud to take place. Many of them apparently deliberately designed into those systems. And again, I want to point out Bev Harris and her wonderful website, blackboxvoting.org. When they were looking at the Diebold election system, they found 12 different ways it could be gotten into to change the results of an election and leave no trace at all. Which is why we have to get rid of those machines. We have to get rid of the tabulation centers. We have to crowd count our own elections. And I'm hearing from people in other countries, they're already doing it, and it works. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to talk a little bit about immigration, the refugee crisis. We're still seeing the war of words going on over Donald Trump's temporary moratorium for travel from 7 specific countries. 7 specific countries were actually chosen by George W. Bush and Barack Obama. And the corporate media is still out there trying to push it's a Muslim ban, it's a Muslim ban, it's discrimination, it's attacking their religion. And the executive order does not say anything about Muslims. And the reality is, if you are coming from one of those countries, it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, Pastafarian, or Scientologist, you're going to have the same exact degree of difficulty getting into the United States of America. Now, at this point, it's becoming very obvious that the original judge who issued the stay was not only ignorant of the Title VIII, the Title VIII provisions granting President Trump the authority to restrict certain classes of aliens, which had been used by Barack Obama no less than 9 times. The judge also lied because in his decision he said nobody from these 7 countries is suspected of being a terrorist, and now we find out that a lot of people arrested and charged with acts of terrorism did in fact come from those countries. So the question is, if a judge is lying in his decision, does that render the decision null and void? It ought to. We ought to have an updated version of Marbury versus Madison, that when a judge lies in his decision, it renders the decision automatically null and void. Story coming out of USA Politics today. They ran an online survey. Should America accept over 200,000 refugees in 2017? Yes only got 23 votes out of a total of 2,600. And that is the real measure of the American people's sympathies on this. Now, the president of Austria has gone on a rant saying that everybody who voted in favor of Brexit is thick and crazy, and you're just not very nice people. And when they get down to calling you names, you know you're on the verge of winning here. David McWilliams is advising Ireland to start creating and stockpiling their own internal currency in case of a euro breakup. Because if Marine Le Pen wins the French election, and it does look like she's going to do that, that might be the beginning of the euro breakup, and everybody's going to be going back to their own currencies. The common currency is going to be gone. They're going to have a heck of a mess cleaning up the refugee problem here. Now, Geert Wilders is responding to a comment from the Prime Minister of the Netherlands saying that MPs are not going to work with him if he wins the election, which looks like Geert will be dealing with the same bureaucratic inertia that Trump is having to deal with. And almost seem to think there's too much politics within the government. Politics is how you're supposed to get into the government. It shouldn't really be a factor. Speaking of Ireland, I just got an email from somebody in Ireland saying they got rid of the electronic voting machines. Every vote's counted by hand with a followable paper trail. See, everybody knows what the solution is. We just have to convince Americans that we need to go to that same system. There is no law that says we have to be told who won the election that same night or the following morning. When this nation was started, it could often take weeks for the voters to find out who won that election. There's no requirement we be informed instantaneously, especially with all the problems with those electronic voting machines. And now we're hearing that the Trump administration is now saying that they have been provided or are providing enormous evidence of vote fraud. And they're basically saying that in actuality, Donald Trump won the popular vote when you subtract out all the illegal immigrants who voted, all the people who voted twice, all the dead voters. This was probably the crookedest election in U.S. history, and we, the people, were able to overcome it. And now that we've done it, we've got to seize this opportunity to demand a complete revamping of the way elections are done. And we have to come up with a system that absolutely protects the integrity of the will of the American people in all future elections, and not just open us up to a global mob coming on in and voting themselves more bread and circuses at our expense. Now, Nigel Farage is having a little bit of a happy dance here, saying we've got the European Union on the run. Juncker has actually admitted Britain is more in control of the Brexit process than the EU is. And Jean-Claude Juncker is saying cracks are appearing in the European Union. And by the way, Juncker is not going to run for another term in office because he doesn't want to be in that center seat when it all starts coming apart. Meanwhile, Marine Le Pen is slamming the EU for bringing not only terrorism but massive unemployment into France with this ridiculous open borders refugee policy. It has been nothing but problems for everybody involved, and even the refugees aren't happy. They're not getting all the free goodies they were promised. A lot of them are finding winter in Europe far too cold. The cold winter is actually convincing a lot of these people to start heading back home here. Now, a while back, we were celebrating over the news that Donald Trump had formally withdrawn the United States of America from the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. But like a vampire rising from its grave in the dark, the TPP is now being resold under a new name and a new brand, the Trade in Services Agreement. And it's more secretive and potentially more dangerous than TPP. Remember, both of these, TPP and TTIP, were being negotiated in secret. They didn't want ordinary people to know what was in there because they were afraid there would be a negative reaction, which is exactly what happened when the details leaked on out. Now, getting on back to Washington. Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson has said he will use every tool at his disposal to ensure that President Trump upholds the Constitution. And he was on ABC's This Week saying, my job as Attorney General is to uphold the rule of law in this country. And I will use every tool I have as Attorney General to make sure the President follows the Constitution. All right, one more time for all the dullards out there at the Church of Liberalology. Title 8 U.S. Code Section 1182. Whenever the President finds that the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. And it goes on from there with more authority to the Attorney General. Now, I dare that Attorney General of Washington State to show me where in the Constitution that non-citizens in foreign countries have any right to come to the United States without restriction. I mentioned this a little while ago. New report finds 72 charged terrorists did come from the countries covered by the Trump ban, which means the federal judge who halted President Donald Trump's travel moratorium lied. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, where political correctness still reigns, apparently Sweden has decided that they're going to build a camel park to help the migrants feel at home. And they're hoping it will provide jobs for the migrants to clean up after those camels. The plans have been slammed as racist and absurd. And they are. It really is. Remember what Teddy Roosevelt said. You're welcome to come here, but understand you're coming to this country, and we have ways that we do things here. And you have to adapt and integrate to that. You don't come into our country and then start screaming about how you want it to be changed to that country you just ran away from. And there's the real absurdity in it all. We have all these people who claim to be coming from countries where there's no freedom of speech and women are abused and everything, and they get to the United States of America, and what are they doing? They're demanding we turn the United States into a country where nobody has freedom of speech and women are still abused. Why does that make any sense whatsoever? Following on with that poll that I just mentioned about people in America just saying no more of the refugees. Story coming out of Russia Today. Majority of Europeans want Trump-style clamp down on immigration. Chatham House released a poll showing the majority of people in 10 EU countries would support an immigration ban on Muslim-majority countries. Now, little point of clarification. Donald Trump has not imposed a permanent ban. It's a moratorium for 90 days while improved vetting procedures are set up. Only in the minds of the corporate media and the snowflake buttercup liberalologists is this a ban on Muslims. Now, story coming out of girlsjustwannahaveguns.com. I love that name, by the way. Apparently, somebody is publishing a what-to-do guide for illegals if Immigrations and Customs Enforcement comes to their door. It's an instruction manual on how you should respond. And it's ridiculous because these ICE agents are doing their jobs and they're following the law. Meanwhile, anyone aiding illegals to evade ICE is in violation of Title 8 U.S. Code Section 1324. In fact, anybody encouraging illegals to stay in the U.S. faces 5 years in prison. And what really should be alarming to everybody is that all of these individuals who are helping George Soros bring about his New World Order, borderless world, migration, they're all risking jail time. And if they get arrested and sent to prison, do you think Soros is going to lift a finger to help them? No. There's plenty more useful idiots out there. Our colleges and universities are cranking them out by the cargo load right now. Now, Donald Trump's threats of funding cuts are having an effect. More and more sanctuary cities are basically dropping that policy and agreeing that their police forces will in fact cooperate with immigration and customs authorities. Now, when Donald Trump came on in, one of the issues that was kind of hovering over everybody's head was the CIA's torture report, which had been released in heavily redacted form. And everybody was saying, is Donald Trump going to come clean on this, or he's going to continue the cover-up? And apparently, the Trump administration has now complied with a court order and released the unredacted report. So it's in the courts right now, and at some point it'll be made part of the public record. And we're going to find out just what the CIA has been doing around the world that has made so many of these countries hate us. Now, over in Great Britain, they just passed a new law where any British journalists who receive or publish government secrets by whistleblowers of any kind or organizations like WikiLeaks are looking at 14 years in jail. The signs of a government that very clearly has something to hide from their own people. This from the country that gave the world the Magna Carta. Well, that's what the independent media is for anyway. And it's getting a little more interesting over in the Clive Bundy case, because the government's case against Clive Bundy rests on allegations made by a witness whose identity is being withheld. And the government lawyers are saying we need to protect this guy against revenge and everything. And Clive Bundy's defense lawyers are saying if we're not allowed to know who this person is, then we cannot act to find out if this is somebody whose word should be taken, just on the say-so of the government. And the judge agreed. The judge has ordered the federal government to identify the undercover agent who was working within Clive Bundy's circle and provided the information leading to these trumped-up charges so that the government could steal their ranch. And I think that's a good thing there as well. Over in Butler County, the village of New Miami has been ordered by a judge to refund $3 million in fines to over 45,000 motorists ticketed for speeding by traffic light cameras. This was ruled unconstitutional in 2014 following revelations that the cameras are often miscalibrated to maximize revenue. We're going to take a phone call now. James in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. I wanted to ask you, I don't have a lot of information myself as yet. I've just gotten a few little bits and pieces here and there, but have you read much about the so-called shadow government that Obama is putting together?
Well, it's not so much a shadow government as he's building a coalition to try and stall and block and interfere with President Trump as much as possible. And it's rather revealing. Originally, the Obamas were going to come back to live here on Oahu, and they actually did buy a place over where he'd been staying for his Christmases. And frankly, I think the people of Oahu are breathing a sigh of relief because when the Obamas were here, the traffic would just gridlock. But apparently the Obamas have bought a new home less than 2 miles from the current White House, and that has become the hub for the liberals to try and figure out some way to either destroy Donald Trump or make sure he's a single-term president. And apparently Hillary Clinton has now officially declared as a candidate for 2020.
Oh, I hadn't heard that she's officially declared.
Yep.
I thought that, it was more or less a, what do you call it, unofficial or ad hoc candidate. But, she'll be, 73, 74 then?
Mm-hmm.
She'll be the oldest person to ever run for a first term.
Well, that'll be true, but and I hope Donald Trump will take that seriously and undertake to have an investigation into what Hillary was doing. It's just going to take just one felony conviction to make her ineligible for the White House. And I think Trump needs to be putting some effort on that right now. All right, thank you very much for the phone call, James. We're going to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we got some science news to share with you. More and more people are becoming very concerned about what's happening at the remains of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, in particular Unit Number 2. And the concern is that the corium, which is the name given to the melted fuel rod assemblies, has in fact burned all the way through the bottom of the containment vessel, the outer containment, the dry well, and is pooling down in the ground in a liquid form because of the ongoing out-of-control spontaneous fission. And the only reason we're probably not seeing it interact with the groundwater much is it's probably melting the soil around it into glass, vitrification. So it's literally creating its own little crucible to sit and radiate away in, and that is a very good thing because you don't want the water to get in there, because that could accelerate the reaction, and if it starts producing a radioactive geyser, there's going to be an issue. But according to this article out of NN News, the concern here is that Japan remains a seismically active area, and that a significant quake at that site could bring down the remains of those reactors and greatly accelerate whatever's going on down in the ground. They have made a huge, huge mess. There doesn't seem to be any way of cleaning it up. They're already talking about an estimated price tag for the cleanup of something like $300 billion, which, well, the Pentagon goes through that kind of money every year. They lose it. They misplace it. Now, Metsui Murata, the former Japanese ambassador to Switzerland, is pointing out that the potential consequences and risks of Fukushima continue to be ignored officially, glossed over, The Japanese people are actually being told it's okay to go back and live in the area. The Japanese government is now approving food grown in the area to be exported. And this former ambassador is saying that no single nuclear weapon can match the potential damage from Fukushima Unit Number 4. Now again, because of the degree of refinement in the uranium at Fukushima cannot sustain an explosive chain reaction. There isn't going to be a mushroom cloud. But it can continue out of control fission. And here is where the danger comes on in. In a nuclear weapon, only a tiny amount of the nuclear fuel is actually converted to energy. At that point, the weapon blows apart, and there's a lot of that core that is not used. It's just a reality of the design. When you have an uncontrolled fission of a fuel mass, it's going to keep on going until all the fuel is gone. That is the problem. We've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And before I get back to more serious news, I want to jump on back to this issue of Joy Villa, who, during her appearance at the Grammy Awards, appeared in this red, white, and blue dress that said, "Make America Great Again," and on the back it said Donald Trump, is brutally being attacked online by Black Lives Matter and everybody else. The public, though, has gone a different direction because the sales of her music skyrocketed literally 18 million% in one day. Her album, I Make the Static, had leapt to number 1 on the U.S. iTunes album sales chart, as well as number 1 on Amazon's top digital albums. Before her Grammy appearance, she'd been ranked at Amazon at 543,202. And apparently, as of right now, Joy Villa is outselling Beyoncé, Lady Gaga, and Bruno Mars. So, good for her. Good for her. All righty, getting on back to the news. Up in Chicago, 2 teen girls were shot in the head in separate incidents. In both cases, they appear not to have been the intended targets, but just in the way of somebody shooting someplace else. And we're basically looking, Chicago has an average of more than 2 murders every single day, 10 shootings every single day. That's the average over the last year. See how well gun control works? When you disarm the law-abiding citizens, then the criminals have no reason not to go on shooting rampages to settle their turf wars. It's amazing. All right, along with investigating election fraud, which I'm fully in favor of, Donald Trump is setting up this Vaccine Safety Commission. It's chaired by Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. The medical industrial complex is going absolutely bananas. They're already launching a PR campaign to remind everybody how wonderful vaccines are and how anybody who says vaccines are bad is just a tinfoil hat kook, wingnut conspiracy wacko, and you shouldn't listen to them. You should only listen to corporate media. You should only listen to corporate spokesmen. You shouldn't listen to your fellow American because they're all woof woof crazy. Now, article coming out of Natural Blaze is pointing out that along with the Yale University study that was linking autism and vaccines, we have this study from the Rand Corporation, came out in 2014, not a word of it in the corporate media, and the Rand Corporation, which is a highly respected think tank, found strong evidence cause Guillain-Barré syndrome, which we've seen that before. We even saw that back in 2009 during the When Pigs Fly flu. People who got the swine flu vaccination came down with Guillain-Barré syndrome, along with myalgia, seizures, meningitis, encephalitis, other adverse health problems. The evidence is out there, and the corporate media continues to lie to you to sell the products and to protect these corporations from litigation. And see, here's where it all starts to get very iffy for all these pharmaceutical corporations. They have been indemnified from civil lawsuit by the Homeland Security Act. If you feel a member of your family was adversely affected by vaccines, you have to go to the vaccine court. The vaccine court is funded by taxpayer dollars, not the pharmaceutical industries. And the vaccine court of late has been using this now discredited CDC report that said there's no link between vaccines and autism to deny the parents of autistic children any kind of financial aid. Because there are just too many of them already. Now again, one of the authors of that CDC report came forward to say it was fake. They cherry-picked the data to get a desired outcome, and CDC cannot be seen as an impartial observer on the question of vaccine safety because CDC owns more than 20 patents on vaccines from which they generate $4.5 billion in revenues every single year. They have a clear monetary bias. Now then, we posted a link to a journal article. This is over at ncbi.nim.nih.gov, National Institutes of Health. And the article, I'm going to try and read this out for you. A cellular pertussis vaccination facilitates Bordetella peripatesis infection in a rodent model of bordellosis. Now, in fancy language, what that means is they discovered that the pertussis vaccination was actually stimulating the growth of a related disease in these test animals. In other words, they've now documented how a vaccine really can make a patient sicker rather than better. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Richard in Washington State. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I've been listening to you for quite a while now, and I've been waiting to come up on the subject. The Founding Fathers were very wise. And the Fourth Amendment, I keep hearing people say that, like in California, the legislature makes it compulsory for vaccinations.
Yep.
Okay, well, the Fourth Amendment, right, the first words are, the right of the people to be secure in their persons.
Mm-hmm.
That would be your persona. It's already covered in the Fourth Amendment.
I would agree,
they can't violate your person.
We have a government that is basically ignoring the Constitution, or they're weasel wording their way around it. And again, it's big business. Vaccines are $30 billion a year. And with that kind of money, they're going to keep on going because they like having that kind of money coming on in. And as long as the taxpayers get stuck paying for those people who can actually prove they're injured by vaccines, they're not going to change their behavior. And I am really...
Well, I thought it was all about civil rights.
Well, I would see it as the most basic right to decide what your body is either eating or not eating, or what medications it's taking or not taking. I would consider that it may have been such an obvious right that the Founding Fathers didn't think it needed to be put into the Bill of Rights.
Well, what's right there? It says secure in their persons, your persona.
Well, you need to read.
That's your person.
You need to read the right. It says secure in their persons against unreasonable search or seizure, and that unfortunately constrains the interpretation of what can be done with a person's, with your body. And again, it's argued back and forth. What we need to do is to get the American people to wake up and realize this is harmful. That our medical industrial complex is profitable only so long as we are kept chronically ill and in constant need of treatment of symptoms.
Oh, you don't get any argument on that issue?
No, absolutely not. Anything else?
No, but that's been a burden for me for quite a while. Is this persona violation thing? It's so obvious that I'm surprised that they can't take that to some type of court and get it resolved.
If we had honest judges and an honest court system. But again, look at that judge who issued the stay against Trump's travel moratorium. Clearly in ignorance of Title VIII, misrepresented the reality of how many people from those countries had been charged with terrorism. When you have judges who are that corrupt, it almost seems like a waste of time to go to court.
Yeah, it's expensive, and I think it's designed that way.
Well, it's designed that way to give the advantage to those who have the most money.
course.
Okay?
Yeah, I have another issue that I wanted to bring up.
Well,
Is that okay?
before you do that, I want to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And, yeah, give me your next issue.
I have a book that said that in the Korean War, that Chiang Kai-shek got in touch with Truman and told him that he'd like to open another front on southern China. And Truman sent the 7th Fleet to block him.
Okay. I'm not that up on the history of. I mean, I know who Chiang Kai-shek was, and but I'm not familiar with that particular chapter of history. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, Truman
kind of shocked me.
Truman had a problem where his own top U.S. military commanders wanted to use nuclear weapons against North Korea. Building on their stunning success in Japan. And Truman threw some cold water on that one.
Yeah, that's always bothered me too, that issue.
Yes.
I mean, that they take a hill and then give it back, take a hill, give it back. Same as they did in Vietnam. Well, you can't cross this line, you can't bomb Haiphong Harbor.
Well, that was all about that was all maximizing the profitability from the war, which is really what it was all about. Having a war to justify taking money away from the American people and giving it to defense contractors and munitions suppliers. And the longer the war goes on, the more profitable it becomes.
Imagine that.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over to Andy in Texas. Aloha, Andy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hey, I just think that what's going on in the mainstream news, or corporate news, if you will, they got nothing on Trump, absolutely nothing on Trump. And so they're picking and pulling and doing all this stuff. That's why you hear this Kellyanne Conway stuff about Ivanka Trump's line of whatever. And then you got, this General Flynn supposedly talked to the Russians and maybe had mentioned a little something about the sanctions, but didn't go into detail. So they're just picking and choosing. So I just want the listening audience to understand and realize that this is even more evidence that we have a true and honest president here, because they have to pick and choose what the heck they're going to bring up and throw at the American people. And they turn every little scenario into something huge. They can't, by the way, because nobody's listening to them anymore. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, they're throwing it out there to get people thinking and stuff. And I think that's feeding fire to these little snowflakes running around breaking windows and stuff and whatnot. I just think this is just a bizarre setup. We got ourselves a godsend president and a chance to turn ourselves around, and here we are.
Well, again, Trump's appeal all along was that he is an outsider, that he did not grow up in this corrupting influence of American politics, and we are very clearly seeing that there is, in fact, an establishment clique that thought it was their divine right to choose future rulers from within their own ranks, and to heck with what the American people actually wanted. Again, I don't agree with everything that Donald Trump says, but we need to keep in mind he is still courting the Senate to get the confirmations of his nominees, and the fact that Trump has already pulled back from saying he was going to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem tells us that he is starting to realize that he has been lied to by the corporate media, not just about himself during last year's election, but about a lot of things over his entire lifetime, and he's starting to really, I think, reassess his worldview. That makes him very, very dangerous to an establishment elite that have been ruling the United States and indeed the whole world with illusions, putting us in a real-life version of the Matrix, and all of a sudden the Matrix is starting to crack, and that's why they're all scared.
Well, what do you make of the Stephen Miller interviews on all these Sunday shows and stuff? He laid it out plain and simple, and he got grilled a little bit more on each channel. He was on all of them. And they were talking about, you showed no proof whatsoever that there was voter fraud. Well, what about the mainstream media just running around saying Russia interfered with our elections, and they showed no proof? So Stephen Miller should be able to say there's voter fraud without proving anything if the media can say Russia was involved in our elections without showing any proof. I mean, this is a hypocritical situation we got. What do you think of that?
It is, and the corporate media is just undermining its own credibility the more they persist with this. But the fact of the matter is there is evidence of election fraud, and there's quite a bit of it. But because the corporate media is part of the problem, they're never going to report it. Remember, the national elections are tabulated by a privately owned company that is owned by the top TV news networks and a couple of influential newspapers. And all of the polling information goes in there. It's a black box. And then all of a sudden they'll come out and say, this is your new ruler. And I think the only reason they didn't come on out and try and proclaim Hillary the winner of the election was the reality is Donald Trump won in a landslide. And if Hillary had been anointed the president, you'd have Americans talking with each other saying, did you vote for Hillary? Did you vote for Hillary? And everybody's saying, no, I didn't have that. And that could lead to a crisis in the streets of America, which I'm sure we'd all like to avoid. But even here in Hawaii, which is a blue state that Hillary carried, just in talking to people around, Hillary's margin here doesn't seem to be as heavy as the official results are. But we need to overhaul our election system. We cannot trust this election system. It is set up to facilitate and conceal election fraud, and we need to go to a system that makes it very easy to see the election fraud, very difficult to carry on out. That's what we need to do. And the first thing we have to do is get rid of those electronic machines. We need to get rid of those tabulation centers where votes are counted in secret and private. We need to crowdsource the counting at the precinct level and just provide a record of all results and totals going all the way up to the national totals so that anybody with a calculator can validate their precinct numbers, made it all the way to the top without being changed, and they can verify the results for themselves. That's going to turn millions of American citizens into voting inspectors, and that is going to keep our election system honest.
Well, you know, with the 306 to 223 win with the electoral vote, I was listening to a show earlier, and there was a guy who actually analyzed that, and he said it's mathematically impossible for her to win the popular vote with that kind of landslide of electoral votes. So it just seems, again, it's just the corporate media propping up their candidate and whatnot. I think the American people need to realize, and I think that a lot of them are, that this is a rigged world. This is a rigged world. We're living in a matrix. We're not living in just society that you. The sad thing is that we're all born into this thing, and none of us had anything to do with society set up. We just have to navigate through it, and it's just a terrible setup that we got going on. Yeah,
it absolutely is. It is nothing at all like we're taught it is in those state-controlled public schools that tell us, you know, that we're the greatest nation on earth, and we've got an honest government, and every other government on earth is really terrible except for Israel, and we should support them, and human-caused global warming. And we're seeing it even at the university level today. That our educational system is not about education at all. It's about indoctrination, getting people to believe the official lies so that those who tell those lies have a system of control over the minds of those people. And it does take a tremendous act of will to break free of those beliefs you're indoctrinated with as a small child. It can actually give you a sense of losing connection with your own identity when you surrender those false beliefs. And there's going to be a period of adjustment, and then of course you're going to see the world with fresh eyes.
Well, I think the biggest atrocity played on the American people was the U.S. government taking over the education system and purposely eliminating the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I mean, what better way to steal people's rights than to not allow them to know what they are?
Oh, yeah. Common Core does that. Common Core actually teaches students that the Second Amendment allows state-controlled militias to have guns. That's not what it says. That's absolutely not what it says. And I can understand why more and more parents are trying to homeschool, which, of course, is why more and more governments are trying to crush homeschooling out. They want the next generation of Americans totally brainwashed so that they will march off to fight a world war without question.
Well, they didn't get me, boss. Anyway, thanks for your time, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here.
All right.
And let's see, do that. Now then, apparently up in Fresno, California, Judge Christy Capitan has ruled that glyphosate must be labeled with the warning, it is known to cause cancer. So from now on, in the state of California, if you are buying Roundup, there will be a warning on there saying this stuff might give you cancer, and Monsanto's pouting and throwing a tantrum and saying, you're going to cut into our profitability if you tell people our product could kill them. It's rather amazing there. Now, there's another aspect to this, and it has to do with what are called super weeds, and when we come back from this break in our commercial, we'll further elucidate. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about GMO crops, and we're talking about glyphosate pesticide. Now, this whole technology was sold as a pairing, and Monsanto went out to these various farms who were basically using all kinds of chemical pesticides to keep insects and weeds out of their gardens. And Monsanto said, we have a weed killer that will kill absolutely everything except for seeds with our special gene in there that makes them immune to the glyphosate. So the idea was, the sales pitch was, you replant your farms with our GMO seeds, you use the Roundup, you don't need to worry about anything else. That was the promise, and it has failed to materialize because of something called evolution. And apparently Monsanto knew this was going to happen after a few years, which is that the pests that want to feed on these food crops have evolved to become glyphosate resistant themselves. And it's led to a phenomenon called the super weeds. These are weeds that are almost impossible to kill. And they are starting to become a serious threat, not only to the farms, but to the surrounding fields and forests. Remember the crisis we had with kudzu a while back? This is more of the same. And the super weeds are literally choking the GMO plants to death. And this is another example, along with Deepwater Horizon, Fukushima, San Onofre, and so forth, of what happens when decisions about the safety of a given product or technology are left under the control of the money junkies, whose only goal is to maximize profitability, get to market first, so we're there and we've got the best of it. And because of the super weeds, the Roundup Ready crops and Roundup may not have a market much longer. The downside is that pollen remains, unless you're willing to do what Hungary did, which was to literally burn every farm field where GMO had been planted to get that pollen. Otherwise, you have to let a farm field lie fallow, meaning unused, for 3 years to make sure that pollen is all dead. It's going to be very, very hard, if not impossible, to put this particular genie back into that particular bottle. Now, there have been headlines all over the corporate and, for that matter, independent media that Vladimir Putin is going to make a Valentine's Day present of Edward Snowden to Donald Trump. And obviously, for those of us who think Edward Snowden is a hero, it was very alarming news. It certainly does not make Putin look very good, or even Donald Trump, who I don't think really fully appreciates the circumstances that led to Edward Snowden doing what he did. As it turns out, there are reasons to doubt this story. It may be just more fake news, because we certainly did not hear this announcement from anybody in Russia. This came out of NBC, citing unnamed U.S. intelligence officials. And that's it. And at this point, I would say the prudent thing to do is not watch the corporate media anymore, not read the corporate newspapers. They're unrepentant liars. They learned absolutely nothing from the embarrassments of last year's election season. They are still trying to play the game by the rules under which they make all that money. They know if they start telling the truth, they're going to have to give up those multi-million-dollar paychecks. So, of course, they're going to go online until those who write those multi-million-dollar paychecks are realizing it is all wasted money. because the American people just will not trust the corporate media, or for that matter, the government. We could see a huge unraveling of many things we thought we could trust in the coming years. Vaccine safety, trustworthiness of corporations like Monsanto, the election system. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently there has been a huge drug bust involving workers of the TSA down in Puerto Rico. And we're still getting the details on that. Let's go back to the phones. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I'm doing okay.
Okay, one, I was watching Crosstalk earlier on, RT.
Yes.
And one of the best political shows around. And they were even saying this thing about Snowden is true. They said it's not even worth commenting on it. That it's absolute nonsense. And when you really look at it, it would be a lose-lose situation for both Putin and for Trump. Putin would look like he's losing. He doesn't have any honor at all by giving Snowden up like that. And Trump, if he brought him back anywhere other than with a pardon, his whole support would split up. People like me would desert him in droves, and I say that's the majority of the deplorables. So I can't anything like that happen. The other thing is, as far as Flynn goes, this is something we really got to be alert on. I've watched the fake news network. You know, the Fox.
Yes.
And they're all for getting rid of Flynn. The Fox establishment. They want, he did the bad thing. He did the cover up. He did this. He's talking to the Russians when he shouldn't be. All this nonsense. And I tweeted Trump twice already today. Leave Flynn alone. And people need to do that. Also, you need to go to real Donald Trump on. He reads a lot of his Twitter. A lot of his tweets. Tell him, leave Flynn alone. That man's a patriot. That man he's a real whistleblower. He's the one who made it clear that we were running guns to the terrorists in Syria and out of Libya through Turkey.
Yes.
And it was because of him, at the time actually talking to the Russians, that probably averted the United States from getting military involved after the phony gas attack there in Syria, with they could fight a terrorist, but they could try to make it look like Assad did it. So we got to make sure that Flynn doesn't go anywhere, because I know the neocons would love to get a guy like, what's that Hungarian, some guy, he's got an accent, I think he's from Hungary originally, but I notice he's always on a lot of these news shows and a lot of the the mainstream talk stations and stuff like that. And I think that's what the neocons would love to get in Flynn's place there as National Security Advisor.
Yeah, but hang on. Let me cut you off here, because Kellyanne Conway's already come on out and said the Trump administration has full confidence in Michael Flynn. Flynn is not going to be forced to step down. And again, the issue of his meeting with the Russian ambassador, they can talk about anything they want to talk about. It becomes a violation of the Logan Act only if some kind of a deal was struck between the Russian ambassador.
You understand it.
Yeah.
But that Sean Spicer was on, when I was at the gym, Sean Spicer character was on, and he was saying, haven't made a decision yet or something like that. It's still up in the air.
Well, the thing with Kellyanne Conway just came on out just about an hour ago. So I think that's the end of that issue.
I hope you're right. I really hope you're right, because these people these rats will have nothing better to take General Flynn down. I don't agree 100% with General Flynn. I don't think Iran is the problem he's making him out to be. But at least Flynn is reasonable. At least he wants to. He doesn't want World War III. And he's trying to be as truthful as he can. And he put his whole career on the line when he confronted Obama about supplying the terrorists with all these weapons. So
well, let me
make sure.
Okay, Mark, I need to close you down here for a second, because I need to make a comment. I am seeing encouraging signs that Donald Trump is adapting to the realities as he encounters them. That he's not coming on in saying, these are my policies and I refuse to change them because I don't want to appear to be weak and so forth and so on. Certainly the one about the embassy in Israel is very, very significant. I think that Donald Trump may have a rethink about Edward Snowden. Certainly his willingness to go after the vaccines and address the issue of election fraud. Overall, I think he's doing a great job. I don't agree with everything he said, but then nobody ever agrees 100% with anybody else anyway. What I am waiting to see is after Trump is through the confirmation process at the Senate, and he either has or doesn't have all of his appointees confirmed, I'm going to be looking for changes in his behavior at that point. Okay?
I agree with you, Mike.
Okay.
But again, as Paul Craig Roberts says, yeah, I agree with you. But the problem is, as Paul Craig Roberts says, there's not a whole lot of experienced people other than a lot of these neocons and think tanks hanging around Washington. And it's going to be it's very hard for him to fight these people off. They're like,
yeah, well, it looks like he's getting ready to. It looks like he's getting ready to. We're hearing that he may replace his chief of staff because he's very unhappy at how many of the neocon war hawks have managed to infiltrate his administration, and he doesn't want that. One thing Donald Trump is, he's a top-down manager, and he's not going to have any tolerance for people who come on into the White House and think they know better than the president. Even if they actually, in fact, do, he's not going to put up with it. As far as finding people, maybe Trump ought to remember the secret of his success was that he's from outside the establishment. And maybe he needs to start looking at people who are from outside the establishment to give him advice, at least in his kitchen cabinet. That doesn't have to be confirmed. He needs to start building a network of people who have been following American politics for decades and who are good analysts on it. And maybe they don't have the fancy degrees or anything, but they're there with an opinion that he can basically verify on his own that this is the straight dope. Anyway, listen, I need to let you go because we're coming out of time here, and I got a bunch more stuff to cover. So, now then, on to computers and all that pertains to here. Apparently, there is a security flaw in the WordPress blogging software that lets hackers attack and deface tens of thousands of sites, and apparently are, in some cases, allow them to take over the site completely rather than just spoil pages. WordPress, of course, is always saying, please update your software to avoid falling victim. I still think we need to find some of these cyber criminals and crucify them live on TV, and that'll make some of the problem go away. And I'm rather disappointed to see this because I'm in the process of trying to build a new version of whatreallyhappened.com because the current code is hopelessly obsolete. It's been damaged so much, not only by hackers, but by the last expert that I hired to try and improve the site. It does need to be replaced, and I know everybody's going to say, why replace it? We love it the way it is. But it's just the passage of time and so forth. So if you have a really good recommendation for a content delivery system, I'm not loyal to any one particular system, but if you could recommend a content delivery system and a template package that would get me as close to what we have right now, I would seriously appreciate it if you would email that in here. Now, we mentioned this last week, but we're going to mention it again. The problem of what is called fileless malware, which is malware that gets into these computer systems at banks, and it lurks in the RAM because these machines never turn off, and it's not visible on the disk. You can't do a search for it anywhere, and it's very, very hard to find. Gizmodo is saying it can take several months before system administrators realize their machines have been infected. And where is the NSA in all of this? Aren't they supposed to be protecting our nation's cyber infrastructure from these kinds of problems? Now remember for a while where Apple was selling the Macintosh as somehow magically being immune from the viruses and malware that are a constant tribulation for those of us on Windows. And the reality actually was that there were so few Macintosh sales compared to Windows machines, Windows were simply a much more profitable target. Now that Mac has become a garnered a much larger share of the market, they are now being targeted, and there are warnings going on out that Word documents, and yes, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office is available on the Mac, to be very careful about malware, and apparently the issue has to do with the macro capability in Microsoft Office documents, and if you have not done so already, you should never, you should turn off macros. Period. Just shut them off. Never run macros ever, ever, ever. And if you receive an email with a document saying, please enable macros, that right there is grounds to simply dump the document. Because that's how they get in and mess around with your system. Now, last week, there was a bit of a kerfuffle where some people in the White House or Congress were booted out without explanation. And what has surfaced since then is that apparently some Muslims who were working as information technology workers for the House of Representatives appear to have been conducting some nefarious activities, and were reading the files of members of the House of Representatives to which they were not authorized. And apparently, in addition to the very generous salaries of $160,000 a year that they're paid by the House of Representatives, 4 of them were involved in multiple suspicious mortgage transfers, a debt-evading bankruptcy. 1 of them had more than $1 million in debt. And these are the people who may have leaked the details on the raid that cost that SEAL and an 8-year-old girl their lives. Because when the SEALs showed up, they walked into an ambush. The enemy knew that they were coming there. These may be the leakers here. And, of course, this did not get a huge amount of coverage because the story was coming on out at the same time. The Ninth Circus Court made their decision to uphold the stay on Trump's travel moratorium, even though Title VIII does grant him the authority to do what he did. And the original judge lied in saying that nobody from those listed countries were suspected of terrorism, when in point of fact dozens and dozens have been arrested and charged with terrorism. Now, more and more people are pointing to the dangers of the so-called Internet of Things. These are devices with embedded chips, which supposedly make them hip and cool and modern, and don't really seem to do much of anything else. But apparently, according to a story at networkworld.com, a university had its own intranet attacked, and the attack came from vending machines, smart light bulbs, and 5,000 Internet of Things devices. And they were locked out of their own systems by the botnet. A botnet was controlling these devices and using them to send denial of service packets. Why do we even need these things? And if we need these things, can we not make them more secure? Or is just the rush to get the product out there fast to maximize profits, and when it all falls apart and proves to be a curse on the human population, well, that's somebody else's problem. You know, we'll let the government take care of that. Now, as you know, Google is experimenting with their own artificial intelligence. It's called DeepMind. And apparently, they're revealing that when the system is under stress, when it's confused, when it's not sure what it's doing, it's starting to show tendencies of aggression. And I read this story, and the first thing I thought about was HAL 9000 in the movie 2001, where Hal was given conflicting instructions, couldn't reconcile them, became paranoid, and wound up blowing astronauts out of airlocks. It is a wonderful movie if you've never seen it. In fact, that and Mary Poppins were the movies that convinced me I wanted to work in visual effects. All right, so let's talk about human-caused global warming. Insert ominous music here. We've been reporting on this Russian icebreaker that is trapped in ice at the extreme east of Russia. The ice is so thick. How thick is it, Mike? It's so thick, they're saying this ship is not going to be able to break free until May, possibly even June. And in the meantime, they have actually had to run power lines from the shore to keep the ship warm and habitable for the crew. So much for Al Gore's "The Arctic will be ice-free by 2014." The Northeast is looking in sights of another winter blast of snow and winds. They're still digging out over there. And by the way, they're predicting now more heavy rains coming into the Oroville area starting on Wednesday and continuing through the weekend. So they're not out of the woods on that situation either. Over this last weekend, they had a state of emergency in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, trying to deal with the heavy snowpack there. Last week, the snow was so heavy in New York, the mayor of New York City was telling people, get out of the streets. Just stay home. Don't go to school. Don't go to work. It was too cold, too dangerous for people. Apparently, this last major storm dumped 5 feet of snow in Montana. And schools closed, flights canceled, and winter has returned to the D.C. area. They had a brief warm spell, and everybody said, see, the global warming is back, and now they're back to snow. It is crazy out there. Over in, let's see, Connecticut last week, they were telling their state workers to stay home for safety. And it's snowing, or it did snow, in the United Arab Emirates. Remember when snow fell in the Sahara Desert a short while ago, the first time in 37 years? It was in December. And they said, wow, we'll never see that again. And then, of course, it happened again. And now it's been snowing in the United Arab Emirates. As I mentioned before, it is so cold in Europe, a lot of the Syrian refugees have decided they are going to go back home after all. They didn't get the freebies anyway. There's nothing but friction and hostility around them caused by the troublemakers. And so Norwegian broadcaster NRK had an interview with a Syrian family who said, we're just going to go back home. We can't deal with the cold. So what's going on here? We know that the reality is climate on Earth is determined by solar output and by the shape of the Earth's orbit. And the Earth's orbit naturally stretches from circular to elongated and back over very long periods. Now it turns out there's a smaller cycle that may be explaining some of the more short-term climate changes. More about that when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, our final segment of our program on this Monday. We're talking about human-caused global warming and the real causes of variations in climate here on Earth, of which the biggest is solar output, which is heading into a minimum, and the changing shape of Earth's orbit. Now, everybody already knows there's a long period change where the orbit goes from circular to elliptical. And as it becomes more elliptical, Earth cools because it spends more time at the far end of that ellipse following Kepler's laws of orbital motion. And as the orbit becomes more circular, the Earth will warm up. Well, there's an article that came on out, actually it's a YouTube video, and it's got an idea in there that I think has a certain amount of merit. And what it says is we need to look at the influence on the orbit of the Earth by the two largest gas giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn. And they've amassed a body of data which seems to indicate that when Jupiter and Saturn are aligned together, that they actually succeed in distorting the Earth's orbit just a little bit, making it a little more elliptical, and hence the Earth a little bit cooler. And then when Jupiter and Saturn are on opposite sides of the Sun, their gravity tends to cancel each other out, and there's no distortion of the Earth's orbit. And it does seem to make quite a bit of sense. And they have taken a graph of short-term variations in global temperature and lined it up with a table of just when Jupiter and Saturn are in conjunction. And it does make quite a bit of sense. Now then, I'm going to do an unsolicited plug for a company, and that's the Energizer Battery Company, which has brought back something from the early days of the Ever Ready Company, which was a no-leak guarantee. And we posted a link to this guarantee on the website where they're saying our batteries are designed to prevent damaging leaks, or we will replace your device. And at this point, I'm only buying Energizer lithium batteries from now on, because over the weekend I did a spring cleaning during which I threw out a lot of old equipment, including a few items ruined by leaking batteries. Now, these days I'm in the habit of removing batteries from devices when I'm not using them, which is a huge waste of time. But some of the devices I had to throw away were loaded up with batteries and put into storage before I realized you need to do that. And it's nice to see a company going back to this idea of a leak-proof battery backed with a warranty to replace the ruined devices. And that's why I'm giving them a free plug, because that has been a major, major headache of how much equipment has been destroyed by batteries that leak. And I'm not talking just about the cheap, branded batteries from the big box stores. I'm talking about name brand batteries that have leaked and ruined things, of which flashlights are the least of them. And it's a real big issue of how much stuff I have lost because the batteries leak and destroy the internal workings. And so Energizer it is. They just won themselves a customer on that basis. Because I remember when I was a kid, Everready made good on that guarantee. Of course, back then it was all flashlights. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do a Jim Goddard show up there in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. We're literally in a war between the independent media and the corporate media. They've got all the money, but we've got a lot of people on our side. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.